Hello everybody, thanks for tuning in for another Power Institute training video. On today's video we're going to go over some of the nomenclature of our reducers. Now we're sticking to our reducers. All manufacturers are going to be different, so we're just going to discuss ours today. I brought in a guest for this one. Allison Laporta here, she works in the technical customer service department and she goes and answers these questions every day, so we felt like this would be a good chance to have her explain everything, kind of break down the nomenclature, figure out what everything means, so you guys know. So Allison, welcome.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and jump right into it here. So we have an example nomenclature on the board. We're going to try to break it down letter by letter, and then after we're done breaking that down, going through the entire thing, we'll take our demo here on the table and we'll build a nomenclature off of that. So we'll just get right into it here. We'll start with the first letter.
All right, so your first letter is going to be what type of unit you have, what part of our product line. It could be an L for a BBB, you could have a C for cyclo, an R for hyponic, or an E for HBB. That's just a few of them. We have a large assortment of product lines, but just to give an idea. Then you go into your output shaft orientation, whether it's going to be horizontal, or if your output shaft is going to be vertical, it would change potentially to a V. Okay. After that, you have your mounting style. This is telling us that it's going to be a shaft mount, meaning that it's going to connect to the customer's shaft, and that is how they will mount it to their application. You also could have F for a flange, or H for being a foot-mounted unit instead. Okay. Beyond that, you have M. This is telling us that this has an integral motor. This is a Sumitomo supplied motor plugged directly into our reducer. Okay,
so there's a lot of things, we're going to reference that a lot going down the list here. There's a lot of things that tie into, if there's a motor, some things go away.
There are other things cluing us into additional
information. So keep that in mind as we go along, but
yes,
motor is kind of critical there.
Yes. So again, this M alone, just the M, tells us that it's an integral motor. If you have a J or an X in front of your M, that's telling you have either J for a C face or X for a quill adapter, and then we supplied a motor. Okay. You can also have it with just a J or an X, and we didn't supply a motor at all.
It was ready for...
It can vary. It would just be reducer only and ready to be mounted with a motor. Okay. Then we have the S. That is for special.
So special. We get a lot of questions about special.
Yes.
So it could be anything. So It doesn't matter paint color, special bearing, special seal, special motor.
Yes.
It could be anything special. So if you're looking into parts or I need a replacement and you don't tell us the S, you're going to get the wrong unit more than likely because it was a special. So definitely keep an eye on the S's in that position. Definitely. That's the only spot where S's are.
That is probably one of the most important letters in all of our nomenclature because there are so many things that can affect, especially dependent upon the application the customer has.
Right. The sizing could be wrong, the ratings could be totally different.
The seals, the lubrication, temperature ratings, everything can change with one S.
Okay, so keep an eye on the S's.
Yes. After that, you will have, only if you have a motor attached will you have this filled in. This is a 5 horsepower motor. That's what that's telling us. Okay. Obviously, the numbers will change depending on the horsepowers and the fractional options as well, but this one is cluing us into a 5 horse.
Again, tied to the M.
Yes, that goes back to our M. Right. After that, you have your BBB box size, and that is going to be our 4A125. This will change. It could be a double reduction. As an example, you could come here and add a DA, a DB, or a DC, and that would tell you that it now has 2 cyclo units attached to it.
Right, instead of just the one like a standard
Correct.
single. It just adds another stage of reduction.
Another stage of reduction, yes. So this will tell you your box size and then your double reduction if necessary. It also can change depending on the product line that you have. This is specific to just BBBs. Right. HBBs, hyponics, and cyclos have their own box sizes as well.
They have their own layout. They're in this same position, but they won't say 4A 125.
Yes.
They're slightly different, but they're still in that position.
In that same exact position after that motor horsepower. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or S if there's no
motor. If there's no motor, yeah.
Here you have your shaft specification. This is telling us either imperial or metric. This is actually going to be a taper grip bushing. It's going to be 1 inch. And you can change that to a K for a keyed hollow bore. And there's a couple other letters for metric or whatever else you have shaft-wise.
Okay.
Beyond that, you have B. This is going to be your AGMA class rating. Again, this relates back to your motor. It only applies to your integral Sumitomo motors.
Okay.
But this all relates to that AGMA class rating.
Yeah, that can give you a hint into some other things too. So like you said, it's tied to the motor. If we don't supply a motor, we're not going to have that there.
Mm-hmm.
So AGMA, all our ratings are based on AGMA standards. So that kind of gives you a clue on what the service factor could be for the gearbox. A being the least, C being the highest service factor. So if you have two identical nomenclatures, you see one with a B and one with a C, it's safe to say that this C is a little bit higher service factor. Now that's not a positive, you need to check with your ratings based on the frame size. But again, just by looking at it, you can tell the C would have a higher rating.
Yes.
So only if we gave you a motor.
And there is a range that applies, and you can tell what your actual service factor is when you compare your box size with ratio in our catalogs to the ratings table. That will tell you, you can calculate
So
that
again,
out.
just a quick glance could tell you a lot.
Yes.
Just by looking at that one letter.
Yes. Beyond that,
Okay.
you have EP. This is telling you that we have an IE3 Sumitomo motor. Again, integral motor. A lot of it comes back to this M.
Mm-hmm.
This is only going to be found on our IE3 motors and our integral motors for that occasion. You won't have that with, say, a half horsepower. You may have an AV if you have an inverter duty motor that's an
older
half horsepower or an older version
Right.
before we went to the IE3s.
Right.
And if you do, we can get that changed over.
And if it's a C face,
that
nothing
disappears.
Will be there. It'll completely gone.
Yes, because
'Cause
that
again, that
only
could be-
applies to our Sumitomo
Right,
motor.
it could be any motor on there. We don't necessarily know it, so we're not going to put it in our model number. It'll
Correct.
still have the J telling you it's a C phase.
Yep.
But it won't reflect any type of motor because it could be anything.
Right. If we didn't supply it, we can't guarantee what it is.
Right. Okay.
After that, you have your mounting position. This is an extremely critical portion of our nomenclature. This tells us how the customer is going to mount the box. It can affect everything from oil levels to where the oil plug is, where the oil gauge is. So that is an extremely important portion of our nomenclature.
Okay. Yeah. Y1 and Y3, left, right, horizontal, probably the most common, but Y2, like we have shown here, and Y4. If you order as a Y1 and you mount it like a Y2, you're missing a whole lot of oil.
Yes.
So we got to make sure that's covered early on in the installation process or the selection process. So definitely keep an eye out for that one as well.
In certain ones, it can change parts, and some of them will
Right.
change to being grease lubricated in some areas to help.
Yeah, so
as well.
Y1 to Y3, which we have a video on, you can do, no problem. It doesn't change anything. It just looks funny in the nomenclature, but
Yep.
it'll still work. You change your drain plug and your fill valve, your fill port. But Y1 to Y2, that's a different ballgame. You can't do that.
Yes.
Because there's not enough oil. So definitely keep an eye out for that for lubrication purposes mainly. All right, what's next?
All right, so here we have the B. This is going to be for a brake. Again, this only applies to our Sumitomo integral motors. That will not be there even if we have a JM. Unless it is our Sumitomo motor, we will not have a B. But that tells us that there is a brake on our actual motor.
On the motor itself. Okay, good to know.
And then beyond that is something that everybody probably recognizes, our ratio for our gearbox. This is extremely important, especially when you're combining it with your box size to find out ratings as well as your output RPM relates
Speed
to your
for the
ratio.
application. Yeah, this is somewhat common between all of our products, obviously, but even the competition in general. The ratio is somewhere in there, and ours it's right on the end. So just by looking at this, you know what your motor speed is. Here's your ratio, you know your output speed.
Yes.
So we try to keep that as handy as we can for informational purposes. But that's always there. We'll show you some graphics on how many different ratios it can be. I don't even know if it'll fill the whole screen, but
Probably.
it can definitely be a lot more of that. But all the ratios are always shown.
Yes.
So, okay, great. So we have this one up here now, so we get an idea. So let's just kind of go through here and build this one here. Hopefully we can see this one okay. This is a BBB unit. It's a smaller one. So let's just kind of start across right underneath this one and kind of work through it. So,
All right.
well, as I said, it's already BBB.
Yes, we know that's an L.
All BBBs will have an L.
All of our
Doesn't
BBBs will
matter
start with an L.
what frame size, doesn't matter what ratio, it'll always have an L.
And then we would be an LH because this output shaft is horizontally
Correct.
mounted.
The output shaft is going left to right, so that's horizontal, so that's H.
And then you would have a Y because you have the taper grip bushing here.
So taper grip bushing gets a Y.
And unlike the original model that was an integral gear motor with an M, I mentioned how you could have a J for a C-face adapter. This actually has the C-face adapter, so it would be
and no motor.
and no motor attached, so it would just be a J.
Right.
And then no, you may or may not have an S.
Right. So if
We
you get in
don't
this
know without a
situation,
serial number.
right. So if you're getting in this situation, well, you do have to figure out what you have. you would never know if there's an S on here.
Correct.
But
because
just by
there are
looking
a lot
at
of internal things that can be changed that
Right.
are considered a special. Everything from seals to a different type of bearing, the lubrication that could
Paint
be
color.
supplied, the paint color on the output side,
So-
on the outside of it.
S you won't necessarily know, but if you're trying to get some information out of it, you'll get pretty close just by doing this.
Yes.
So we'll assume this isn't an S.
We'll assume this is a plain Jane unit,
Nothing special.
just run of the mill. Because we have no motor, we would drop this 5. There would
Okay.
be no motor there.
Yep, it's just open shaft on the C face. Yep.
Beyond that, we would then find our box size, and this box size makes up the BBB size and our
Right.
cyclo.
So to find that, go ahead. We know this one's a 4A115. It's just hard to show on camera, but there is stampings in the side of the cyclo portion, and you can see the frame size, but they're just very hard to see on camera. So, but we know this one's a 4A115.
Yep. And then for this instance, we will have an inch shaft taper bushing. So we would have a Y here. And we talked about AGMA class rating, and again, this only applies when you have an integral motor. We have no integral motor, so we would
So
skip that
one would be
portion.
blank. Yep.
We would also skip the EP because again, we have no
It's
integral
tied to
motor.
the
A
motor,
lot
yeah.
of it ties together.
To the motor itself. Right.
This one is going to be a Y2 mount because your motor is going to be vertical up. After that, we have what would be a B. Again, no motor.
Tied to the motor.
The B
It's
drops.
not there. Yep.
And then we would have our ratio. For this instance, we'll do a 20 gauge. And now you have your reducer nomenclature, which you can see is much shorter because we have dropped so many
Right.
letters
So
of the
you can
nomenclature.
see with all that information, we just by looking at it, we never turned it on.
Mhm.
The ratio is stamped to it.
Mhm.
Everything's there. So
Yes.
so
The
with this,
nameplate has a lot
right?
of
All this
information.
is on the nameplate. Say your nameplate
Yep.
gets scraped off for whatever reason that happens.
Mhm.
You can just look at this is stamped on there. This is stamped on the ring gear housing as well. So giving us this information. So if you got a phone call with this,
Mhm.
you'd be able to give them a lot of information.
Yes,
Not 100%.
Not everything, but I could give them the baseline of information,
Right.
whether it be nomenclatures, the base ratings for a standard unit.
Right.
We would base it all on a standard unit and then progressively add to the mix depending on the nomenclature,
And you could-
depending on the
The
application.
customer could always go back and tie back into a previous order or whatever the
Mhm.
case may be to find exactly where they ordered.
Yes.
But at least it gets them somewhere.
It's a starting point for
Right.
them. Even
Again,
some
the
parts,
S is the caveat there.
Mhm.
We don't know.
Yes.
So just by looking at it, we don't know if it's
we
special.
can't guarantee it, but we can look at a
But
standard.
we can start somewhere.
Mhm.
So that's the gist of nomenclature, really.
Mhm.
The critical thing we want to just mention, we reiterated a lot with the special, is that if you do see an S, there is something different about it. It's not off the shelf. So if you were to order, if you originally had this and you happen to order this one, even if it was the same frame size, it might not be the same. You might not get the same life for whatever reason. There might not be a different bearing.
You also wouldn't have the motor,
It wouldn't
and
be
we
a
wouldn't be
motor.
able to just plug our motor in
Right,
because
'cause
it's a
it's
C
different.
face,
Right.
not an integral.
So definitely critical if you have that S or not. And if there's any question at all with what you have, the serial number is the most important to us.
Mhm.
In some cases, we have a PA number on the nameplate, which is our product ID. That does help, but it's not as unique to your specific box. So the serial number is the most important. So if you have none of this information available, serial number is what we can give you everything with. So with that, thank you very much, Allison. I think
you.
that covered everything. Any questions about any of these, please feel free to email us, and we'll see you on the next video.